Welcome back, Rabbi Dr. Eliezer Brut. It's a pleasure to have you here. And we forge on talking about Harav Agunah, Chaim Kanievsky, Zecher Tzadik Kalish Levracha. This season 2, believe it or not, we are still in season 2 where we're wrapping it up, has been sponsored anonymously. Le'ilu Nishmas, Moshe Chaim Ben Yitzchak David, May his neshama have an aliyah. Last episode was a very interesting discussion about Likut Seforim throughout the generations. We talked about the Beis Yosef and the Darchei Teshuvah and the Knesset Agadola, Mishnah Brura, Chaim Kanievsky, Derech Agunah. And today we want to discuss something that Chaim Kanievsky writes very often, sometimes more often than you would think is necessary. Whatever he writes is not to be relied on lahalacha. Is that something which has been done throughout the generations? What does it really mean? Do we find Seforim that have that sentence written in them that have become relied upon lahalacha? That is today's conversation. Rabbi Dr. Eliezer Brut, how are you today?
Baruch Hashem. Baruch Hashem. Okay, so you gave a good introduction of summing up what we hope to do today, which is when you something I've pointed out numerous times, and I said I'm hoping to get to discuss. And today, hopefully, we will be Mekayim what I tried to promise to do, which is, let's say you open up the Darchei Teshuvah. On the Shach already he says, Chas v'shalom lo yiras halacha l'maisim v'sefer zeh, ki lo noid ha-sefer rak b'shvil lachzor halachis. It's only meant for chazara, but not for psak halacha. Numerous times at the end of his Hagdama, he'll say this again and again. In let's say Hagdama Darchei Teshuvah, Volume 1. After he goes, Ein lismoich sefer l'maisa klal v'achrayis d'achrin lo kibli alai v'ateres rak l'mtzai hadin l'achzor halachas. It's just for chazara purposes. So now the question is what's going on over here, and do we find precedent for such a thing? Now, Lamaisa, let's say a Posek says such a thing, and you say, you know what, I'll take my chance. Reb Chaim Kanievsky is a great yid. I'm going to say he says you could do it. I'll rely on him. Do we find such a thing in the world of halacha? Did this happen before? Okay, so I set out to look for this. I'm not trying to trace every single gadol that ever says it, but just when you see the following gedolim that we'll talk about, you'll see what the story emerges. The story goes like this. First of all, as far as a Posek, so Chaim Kanievsky, Taka looked at himself not as a Posek, and we will actually fine-tune that more later on because he answers thousands of tshuvas, something like 80 a day for years and years. So what are these type of tshuvas? What are they? Are they halachadik? And when he talks about halacha in them, do we paskin like them? What's going on with them? Okay. Anyway, we pointed out a bunch of times that the Steipler was one of his role models. And the Steipler also was very not into paskening. On the other hand, we do find sometimes he did paskin, but for the most part, he also was very into that he's not a Posek. Where his Talmud, Rabbi Horowitz wrote Dvar Halacha on Hilchos Yichud, they learned ad halacha l'maisa be'iyin gadol, but he holds he's not paskin. Okay. Interestingly enough, with the Steipler, we have a 5-volume set, Archas Rabbeinu, which is Rav Horowitz took down notes of everything that he saw by the Steipler, and these works in recent years have become halacha l'maisa. His anhagas and all different things are always quoted in all the various halacha seforim out there. So l'maisa, even though he held he's not a Posek and everything, and even though maybe Rav Horowitz and he was writing it, he didn't mean for it to be halacha, but eventually it takes on a life of its own and it becomes halacha. Okay. With Rav Chaim Kanievsky is a similar type of thing. In his lifetime, a fancy Sefer came out. I remember when I first saw it, I grabbed it right away, which was pictures of every aspect of Rav Chaim Kanievsky's daily life. They took pictures of him and they show in the pictures all the halachas that one can learn from these pictures. They went through the Seder Hayom through the year whenever they're able to, and gorgeous pictures and a commentary to show all the anhagas you can learn from him. This came out in his lifetime by the family. ArtScroll recently just published it in English, with made it a little nicer with the pictures, but the same pictures from what I was able to see. But the point is, he might not have meant for he's doing what he's doing, but all of a sudden the pictures are out there, and then from the pictures it comes halacha l'maisa. So he could scream as much as he wants, but l'maisa, what ends up happening is these books become halacha l'maisa. So I'm saying I don't even know if there's disclaimers on those books because he didn't publish them against it. Okay, anyway. The point is that sometimes you could want something to happen. You could say I'm not a Posek. You could say it's not halacha l'maisa, but as I said, it takes on a life of its own. Okay. So I'm showing you first is that by the Steipler, his father, and this is what ends up happening with Chaim Kanievsky. Anyway, okay. But as the question is this, do we find anywhere else that this happens? So the answer is yes. Okay, now like this. Before anything, we find in the world of halacha that there are certain areas that people, when they paskin, they would always say, I'm not pasking myself, don't just rely on me. Please find someone else that also says like me. Okay? Where do we find this very often? In Hilchas Agunah, because it was such a chamerdik area, complex. So even superstar Gedolei HaPoskim would say, here's my heter, here's my tshuva, but I'm only masking for you to rely on halacha l'maisa if you could find someone else that agrees with me. Okay? That's a very well-known fact. And in the Sefer Agunah from Rav Kahana, he collects a ton of pages of Gedolei Olam that says. The question is like this: what do we find people writing chiburim, halachadik chiburim, and they say, don't rely on me, halacha l'maisa? So the answer is yes. So first, I'm going to quote a passage I saw Rabbi Soloveitchik, Rabbi Yosef Soloveitchik, in his book called Halachic Man. He talks about that there is such a thing, that there were people that they were not so that the great that they like to learn Torah Avada, but the psak halacha, or even when they became a rav of a city, they tried to avoid paskening as much as possible. He doesn't spell out specifically here, maybe he does elsewhere, but it's clear in Brisk. Reb Chaim Soloveitchik is known that he didn't like to pasken. He would send Mo Shilas. There was a dayan in Brisk. He didn't really do psak halacha, except they say I think in areas of pikuach nefesh. Okay, fine, but question is, were there other gedolim, especially if you're a rav of a city, you know how you can't get away so easily to do such a thing. You're hired to be a Posek. Okay. Anyway, there was a Sefer published many years ago in the time of the night of Yehuda, Adnei Paz. So Adnei Paz is a Sefer on our Chaim, fascinating, chashiv a Sefer. So in his Akdama, he goes out of his way to say, even though I was a Posek in this city and I paskin and everything for years and years, he lists out where he was a rav and everything, but in what I'm writing in my Sefer, I'm not taking achrayas for you to rely on. So I guess it's some type of aspect of, I'm writing my thoughts. Maybe it's interesting for you. Maybe food for thought, as it's called. But don't rely on halacha l'maisa. I'm not taking responsibility. Okay, interesting. A little later, we find the Pri Megadim. The Pri Megadim, which anyone who learns halacha or Chaim Yeridea knows you can't move without the Pri Megadim. Pri Megadim in his Hakdama to Yeridea, he spells this out. He says, after he talks about all the different things, what he's doing in his Sefer, he says, but avada halacha l'maisa, to rely on me? No way. Al yismach alai b'shum davar, hein bepirish shasiti ala shulchan aruch ta Shach, umikol shkein eze chidush din shem tzati me'esvarasi. Don't rely on me. Rak, he wrote it, and that's why we find a lot of times it's sarchian by him and everything. And now everyone knows when you learn halacha, poskim, right and left, everything is the Pri Megadim is beyond important in the world of halacha. Ad psak halacha l'maisa, not just food for thought. L'mashal, the Mishnah Berurah went out of his way. One of his nekudis that he spells out in his Akdama, which we quoted recently, is because the Pri Megadim has valuable information and we need to include it. And the Likutim beforehand didn't have it, such as the Chai Adam. The Pri Megadim only came out mamish the end of the parish of the when the Chai Adam was being worked on, so he doesn't really have psakim of the Pri Megadim. Okay. Does anyone else say such a thing? Yes. We just recently had an episode about the Hafla'ah and the Makna, in the Akdama of the Hafla'ah and the Makna, where he goes out of his way to say, I'm writing a Chibur on Shulchan Aruch. But then he says, Ein lismoich alai afilu b'shas hatchak. Don't rely on me, afilu b'shas hatchak. What's going on here? So you see here yet again another great gain. Now, do we rely on in the world of halacha on Hafla'ah and Amakna and halacha l'maisa? Behechlet, we 100% do. He says, Ein lismay chalai, afilu shloi b'shas hatchak. Similarly, we find in Nesivos, same thing. He says in Zagdam, not to rely on me, halacha l'maisa. What? The Nesivos says such a thing? Of course, everyone knows in the world of halacha, the Nesivos is bread and butter for Poskim. We rely on him. Okay. Not only that, we have Rabbi Akiva Eiger. Rabbi Akiva Eiger in the Akdama to his Sefer, when he's corresponding with his children about writing up, about publishing the Sefer. So he also goes out of his way to say that, yes, I paskined when someone wrote to me, I did, but that it should become that it's tamin miyari hayra anochi, and it's bad enough I had to paskin when someone asked me, but It's not my safe achlata. It's not my safe thing, and don't rely on me. Loilam vayed. You have to first check into it. I'm not taking a achrayas for everyone just to blindly open up the Sefer and just say, "Oh, it's often a truest Rabbi Akiva Eiger, and that's good enough for me." Says Rabbi Akiva Eiger, certainly not. Do not rely on me for such a thing. Meaning to say, I'm telling you how I learn up the sugya, but you yourself should learn up the sugya and see if you agree with me. So I'm listing out over here all these different superstars that this is what they did. Turns out, the Moshe Hafla'ah points this out already, but if you learn the Hagdama of the Shach, in his Hagdama to Yeridea says the same thing. Don't rely on me. So what is going on over here? We see all these paiskim, and I just listed you a bunch of superstars that the world of halacha is, as I said, it's the bread and butter of the world of halacha. They rely on all these people. Okay. Now, one other marmakim in this is who handles barichos, this Rabbi Akiva Eiger and everything, is Agunah Moshe Feinstein, is the famous Hagdama to Volume 1 of Eiger's Moshe, and I believe he talks about it more in other places. I saw Marshall Professor Spiegel in his book Amudim Tolu Sefer Evri. He also has a few pages about this topic. He has other sources of Gedolim that write, don't rely on me. So Rav Moshe handles this Rabbi Akiva Eiger, and he talks about himself also, and he brings Makairis about it. How could I be a Posek? How could you rely on me? And again, Rav Moshe, talking unbelievable things that he says in the Hagdama. I highly recommend one to learn this Hagdama very carefully. It's very, 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 very important. There's a lot of Yisayis and Halacha L'mais over here. In Rav Moshe Bechlal, you understand him, where he's coming from. But the point is that what a lot of these poskim are trying to say is like this. I reached these conclusions, I learned, but don't trust me. You should learn the sugya yourself, whatever. Now the question becomes, okay, but what happened? Klal Yisrael said like this. Let's say I'm a Rav and I don't have time sensitive. I come across the truth. Ramesha, Avad, I'm relying on the Ramesha. Rabbi Akiva Eiger and all the other that I just listed off from the Shach and onwards. But the point is, Chaim Kanievsky is not unique. So far, what I'm showing is these mainstream Yadudik superstar Gedolei Achronim throughout the generations, they all said this about themselves. Okay, fine. So Baruch Hashem, we have some makom, some precedent for Rav Chaim Kanievsky does. Okay, Rav Moshe doesn't write 50 times over his Seforim, but Rav Moshe is not. Rav Moshe does admit that if you come out you like him, you could rely on him. So Rav Chaim Kanievsky is going further. But if you compare, let's say, to that Hafla'ah says, in his Kuntres Achron, his Chibur and Shulchan Aruch, every Posek in Even HaEzer relies on when it comes up, and you have Hafla'ah Makna, you rely on him. Anyway, okay. Now, there's an interesting story with all this. I can't even remember yet how I came to this, but at one point, I became very interested in a Sefer called Hisorerus Teshuvah from the son of the Ksav Sefer. A beautiful Sefer on halacha. We're not going to go into discussing all the fine points of this Sefer, but it's a very, very interesting Sefer. And at some point, I come across reading that in some editions of the Sefer, he said, "Ein lismoich ala hirazu b'chlal," on every page. That's what he says. So fine, I pull out my copy that I had, and it doesn't have such a thing. So I went to check. Okay, eventually, you could check, and you could see that in the first edition of the Sefer, Hisorerus Teshuvah, it says on the top of every page. So this is even more than Chaim Kanievsky. Chaim Kanievsky only wrote on the Shar and Hagdama, says Reb Shimon Sefer, son of the Ksav Sefer, ein lismoich al ha'ira zu klal. Not to rely on my psakim. Now, just to mention, this Reb Shimon Sefer, Gain Olam, as I said, this Hisorerus Teshuvah was known as an unbelievable Kaddish also. So I was talking to someone recently from Ramat Beit Shemesh, named Michael Kaplan, and I told him this thing. So he says, "Oh, there's a very interesting introduction in one of the Me'iris on Ksuvis, where it talks all about this Baal Hisorerus Teshuvah from his son, because who's the son? The son is Rav Avram Sefer, who we've discussed in previous episodes. He's one of the people that brought the Meiri to light. He was the main person behind publishing the Meiri. And I even mentioned the story once, how the Reb Shlomo Zalman Auerbach wasn't feeling well. He was nifter, and the Levaya was going to be late at night. And Reb Shlomo Zalman Auerbach heard this, so they said, "Oh, you don't have to go. You don't feel well." He says, "Chas v'shalom, I have such a karas atoiv to Rav Avram Sefer for publishing the Meiri," and he made sure to go. That was the story I said. So this Kaplan sends me there's 4 pages where this Rav Avram Sefer writes all about the Baal Hisorerus Teshuvah, his father. And interestingly enough, who is the person who published the most of the Ksavim of the Chaim Sefer? Is this Einikel of the Chassam Sefer, this Reb Shimon Sefer, son of the Ksav Sefer. Now, at some point, fascinating thing, they didn't have money to publish the Ksav and the Chassam Sefer. Now, you have to understand, today, if someone finds a manuscript of the Chassam Sefer, you know how much a page of the Chassam Sefer could go for? A page on auction, $30,000-$40,000. There was a time, not even 100 years ago, that they couldn't fund the Ksavim of the Chassam Sefer to publish. So, and he was the person in charge. He didn't have what to do. Comes in his wife. This is Rav Sefer brings this down. The wife, means his mother, or Rav Sefer's mother, she's also an Einikel of Chassam Sefer through another way, and she gives her jewelry so that the Chassam Sefer's Torah could be published. So it's fascinating is, as time goes on, the Ksavim, the Chassam Sefer, I'm saying if we would have made a campaign, we found now Tshuvas Chassam Sefer, 3 seconds later you would have had $1 million, not even a shayla. Okay, anyway, so sometimes it's fascinating to see the stories behind different svarim that you would think is one way, and at that time it was different than today. Okay, now, but continuing on is that there's what, and that's the rest of today we'll talk about is like this, and this actually relates, will tie in what we discussed in the previous episodes of Sefer Likutim also, and this is as follows. Not all, sometimes the Sefer comes out, and then it comes out that people say, don't rely on this Sefer halacha l'maisa. There's problems in it. It's too cool. There's too many kulas in the Sefer. Okay. And then, and that's what we're going to see about, that there was a request by certain Gedolim to make sure to be madgish in the next printing and put it all over the Sefer. Don't rely on this Sefer halacha l'maisa unless you check out what it said very carefully. Okay, what am I referring to? So this is a fascinating story, and it's going to help us with understanding with the Chassam Sefer. With Reb Chaim Kanievsky and the Steipler also. Okay, so I mentioned already before in the previous episodes that one of the unbelievable Likutim Svarim that were published, that the Steipler, who was very against Likutim Svarim. What am I referring to? In season 1, I mentioned that the Chai Olam from the Steipler, he has a whole piece against Kitzer Svarim, Likut Svarim, that bring down all different psakim and all different pieces of information and whatever, and it's a churva, a very sharp piece. And at that time, we identified that there was a sharp pulmus between the Steipler and Bnei Brak and other Chacham and Bnei Brak against the Shmir Shabbos Kolcha. So we spoke all about this in season 1. So, but the point is that he took out the name of the Sefer he was referring to, but over there he's very sharp against Kitzer Svarim, the Steipler. But on the other hand, the Archis Chaim from the Maharsham, by him, is mamish unbelievable chashuv. So the question is, what's so? And through the next discussion, we're going to see, and we're going to see how it plays out with our conversation that I spoke about not relying on halacha l'maisa, yes, relying on halacha l'maisa. Okay, so like this, approximately 30 years ago, I was learning halacha. I was beginning to learn halacha, so I wanted to know which svarim could one rely on more than others. Let's say you find the kula in a certain sefer, could you rely on this sefer more or less? So I was talking with someone, and he told me as follows. I was asking about, let's say, about the Maharsham. I see it's quoted a lot, let's say, in the Shmir Shabbos Kolchasa. How much weight does the Maharsham have halacha l'maisa? So he told me like this. He said, Avada, you could rely on everything you see in the Maharsham. He was a guy in Olam, and even though in his time he was considered a mekel, and people because of this came out against him, but Lamaisa most understood that he was a Vada, unbelievable Yerushalayim. He even was affiliated with Hasidim. He was a Hasid. He was, I guess, a Hasidish Yid. I don't know if he was officially a Chassid specifically of one Rebbe, but he was definitely Hasidish leanings. And they understood he was not a Kal. And Lamaisa, at the end of the day, his psakim were in his kabel, so you definitely can rely on him. This is what this person told me many years ago. So I was always very curious anytime I would come across things relating to the Maharsham, especially with him as a Posek, to collect this. Okay. Fine. Lamaisa, I come across the Steipler learning Archis Rabbeinu, and the Archis Rabbeinu is full of fascinating information a lot of times. And it seems at one point in time, someone wanted to come out against the Reb Shlomo Zalman Auerbach. He issued a certain psak, and they were going to. I think they even at the end of the day they did put out Kol Kairos against Reb Shlomo Zalman Auerbach and hung it up in signs. I think I even heard from someone he saw when Reb Shlomo Zalman Auerbach was reading the Pachkavilla that they had posted against him. Okay. Anyway, the point is, so the the Tchebiner Rav got involved, and he wrote to the Steipler about it to get the people to be quiet about that. They have no business talking about the Reb Shlomo Zalman Auerbach. This is going back a long time ago. So, and we're talking about that we have the Tchebiner Rav backing up Reb Shlomo Zalman Auerbach, who he was very close with, and he held that they had no business to do such a thing. Anyway, in the course of this conversation, it seems he wrote up a letter to the Steipler about it. He wanted the Steipler to get involved, and this Reb Horowitz saw the letter, but it had to be ripped up for some reason. Maybe it could be that the Tchebiner Rav said not to publish it. Anyway, in the course of the letter, it said that the Tchebiner Rav says that something happened. So I'm not sure in the way the Steipler says it. I'm not sure if it's Tchebiner Rav. We can get to what the Tchebiner Rav says from other sources, but the point was like this: when the Maharsham Sefer on Hilchos Treifus came out, all the way back, so he put out the Sefer called Gilui V'das. Okay, and this Sefer was a massive chibur on Treifus, full of kulas. So some Gedolim, it seems they went out against him. So the way it's brought down over here in Darchei Rabbeinu is, then they went to the Sholem Eshiv, and they said maybe he should be Goinez the Sefer. He says Chas v'Shalom. So it seems that there was a pshara to put on the top of the next printing of the Das Torah, on top, in big letters, Loi lahalacha v'loi lemaisa. So in the story, as the way Rav Horowitz quotes it, is that the Steipler seems to recall that he remembers such a thing that that he saw such a Das Torah on Hilchos Treifus, which said on it, Loi la'alocha v'loi lemaisa. Okay. And then the Steipler, I was being unclear before because I wasn't sure, but now I remember correctly. Basically like this, that the Rabbonim Horowitz is quoting over in the course of this conversation, a conversation he had with the Steipler. The Steipler was saying, not in relation to this story that he had with the Tchebiner Rav, that he recalls that something happened with the Das Torah. People said, oh, he's a makel, and they wanted to come out against him, and the Sholem Eshiv said not to, and the pshara that they said was, they should put on top of the page, Loi la'alocha v'loi lemaisa. Okay, and the Steipler says he saw such a sefer. So right away, I was very curious to see, is there an existing Hilchos Treifus of the Maharsham that says such a thing, that on every page it says halacha l'maisa? And Stam, it's interesting, the Sholem Eshiv, was it the Sholem Eshiv who said this or not? Okay, so this was what got me very curious. I went down at the time to try to track down into Hebrew University to see if there's such a Das Torah. At the time, I was not able to find such a Das Torah. Okay. Anyway, Lemaisa. So the story goes like this: in later editions of the Sefer, so the Maharsham publishes it, and he says in the Hagdama, you should know, this is a Gila Das Levad, v'chalila l'shum meira l'smay chalai b'makam shetzadadati lahakel. When I am makel, do not rely on it. Ad asher yasem einu b'tam halacha b'das Torah v'imit yimit zachem be'einav azi yairo b'prat shechalila l'shum rav sh'lismay chalai lahakel zulas askamas v'chulu v'ein. And he's basically a similar type of thing. He's saying that don't rely on me. So, especially when I'm makel, unless you check into it and you see that it makes sense. What's going on here? So here we're seeing something about Daima to this story that the Steipler remembered, but we're not getting the full story. And was this, when he published it right away, what happened exactly? And is there a way to know what happened and to understand what's going on behind? You say, what did the Steipler remember? And what's the story with relying on the Das Torah? So the answer is like this. Basically, when he first published the Sefer, the first Sefer that he published was on Choshe Mishpat. It's called Mishpatei Shalom, on Choshe Mishpat, and it seems to have made a mapecha. It had, as it says on the Shar, in the Shar it says that he brings down tons of information that's not mefurish in the Shulchan Aruch and Achrayim, from Mefarshei Shulchan Aruch, and with all different things that Chakiras, Usfekas, Dinam Chadasha, Shaloi Niskur, B'Shum Posek. Okay, so it made a major mapecha, and it seems there were kulas in the Sefer. Okay, it seems that the Sefer, according to different versions, the base Yitzchak was upset about this. He saw things that he didn't like. There's different nuschais, and about what exactly it was that he didn't like, and basically, in one of the nuschais of the story is like this: the Tchebiner Rav. We have a conversation preserved from the Tchebiner Rav about this, and the Tchebiner Rav says that when it came out, he talks about further that what happened is when the Gilui Das, not only in the Mishpatei Shalom, but then comes out the Gilui Das, they sent it to the Beis Yitzchak. The Beis Yitzchak saw problems, and so he decided what he's going to do is that it's mamish what it says in this Akdama, that it's nichtav lahalacha v'loy lamaisa. Okay, so there was supposed to be a paper published in, so it wasn't the Shalom Elyashiv, because the Shalom Elyashiv was already nifted. The Shalom Elyashiv rather gave Askam on the Mishpat Shalom, I believe. Actually, I'm not sure if he did, but the Maharsham definitely did have a kesher with the Shalom Elyashiv. I can't remember offhand right now if he gave Askam on the Mishpat Shalom, but what happened is it was Taka, the Steipler was, his memory was correct. There was something up with what? With the Sefer Gilui Das, but it wasn't the Shalom Elyashiv, it was Rabbi Yitzchak Shmelkish, the Baal Beis Yitzchak. So, and the Tanai was to publish a petek, to put a page that, now, not that on every page it's to say such a thing, that's Taka what happens in the Sefer Teshuvah, but the Sefer Teshuvah himself did that. But it should be a disclaimer in the Akdama and Taka. If you open up the edition of the Gilui Das, you'll see a disclaimer not to rely on halacha l'maisa. Okay. Now, interestingly enough, there was these papers, it was supposed to be pasted in. So it seems one survived, the family has it, and recently a fascinating 2-volume work called Posek Aderes, all about the Maharsham, came out from the mishpacha of the Maharsham, and they even put a picture of this paper that was supposed to be pasted into the various into the edition if you bought a copy of the Gilui Das because of the Rabbi Yitzchak Shmelkish, and it says in there, they have the lashon, it's in the handwriting of the Maharsham, that it's halacha veloy lemaisa. So befrat again, such an emphasis. So we see here what happened was that the Sefer came out. There was a snagdus from the Beis Yitzchak, one of the Gedolei of Galicia of the time, and because of that, Maharsham listens to him, puts in a petek in the Sefer, or now it's found in the introductions in the Shar of the earlier printings, and it says not to rely on halacha l'maisa. So now the question is like this: when the Maharsham wrote it, he meant for it to be halacha l'maisa. He wasn't even using the Hagdama of the Shach and all the Gedolim I brought. And then all of a sudden, Rabbi Yitzchak Shmelkish is against him, and then he puts in the petek. So says the Tchebiner Rav, it's cute because anyway, today that petek, no one has that paper anymore, and the Sefer is definitely halacha l'maisa. The Tchebiner Rav was very close with the Maharsham, and he says l'maisa, the Sefer was niskabel halacha l'maisa, even with whatever Rabbi Yitzchak Shmelkish's tainis were on the Sefer, and it's used, and the Tchebiner Rav was very, very into using the Maharsham halacha l'maisa, and he held it was a mapecha in the world of halacha. So we see that what happened was there was an opposition against the Sefer. There was even a thing to write, a changing against the author. I mean, say the Maharsham originally thought that you could rely on him, but because Rabbi Yitzchak Shmelkish was changed, and the Tchebiner Rav says l'maisa, we see Shamayim change. It goes according to Shamayim, and the opposition went. Now the problem was like this: that Rabbi Yitzchak Shmelkish was not the only person against the Sefer of the Maharsham and the Torah of the Maharsham. Another person who held he was too kuldik was known as the Darchei Teshuvah. And the Darchei Teshuvah, when you open up your Darchei Teshuvah, in the Hagdama, Mamish, he says, I bring down Seforim that are Mekel, such as the Das Torah V'Gilui Das, he's Yoiser Midai Mekel, Neged Rabbi Seinu Gedolei Achroinim, Asher Mipin Anu Chaim, Umehem Teitze Torah V'Aroyu, Neged Ha'Ra, Shenispashal Isser. But sometimes he brought it down, but Chalila Lismei Chazel L'Maisa. Don't really rely on this lamaisa. He's just bringing it down, and then he says why he's bringing it down. A few he tells to the famous sugya Idias lam maskir and divrei yachid. So he's saying that he brings it down, but not halacha lamaisa. So here we see the Munkacher Mamish, and it's Yudua that he says such a thing, that he very sharp against the psakim and the chibur of the Maharsham, but he's still bringing it down because obviously hell, it can't be that bad, but he's bringing it down in the Sefer. Okay, fine. So now the shaila which I always had was, okay, so we have over here one of the Gedolim of Galicia, and then we have the Munkacher in the Darchei Teshuvah. They're saying not to rely on it. So what's the story? Do you rely on it or not? So looking further, so I found like this. Number one, Rabbi Zalman Meltzer says that he went through Tshuvas Maharsham, and he saw he's only makel within Yanim of the Rabbanon, but he's machmer by the Raisa. and you could definitely rely on the Maharsham. The Chofetz Chaim's son writes that and things that happen that are current events, so to speak, current shilas, he doesn't really deal with in the Mishnah Berurah. This is the Chofetz Chaim's son talking about his father in the Mishnah Berurah. But he says, what do you say? You look in the Tchebiner Rav's Tshuvas and those type of people. Me say for the Chofetz Chaim, the Maharsham was very important. Akidei Kach, the Likutei Halachos, who does he make sure to get Haskama, Bein HaGedolim that he gets Haskama from, is the Maharsham. So we see the Mishnah Berurah is also very into the Maharsham. Okay, now, furthermore, the Aderes writes that he was very into the Maharsham, so much so that one of the Seforim of the Maharsham that he put out that creates a Mapech and Halachas is there's a Sefer called Darchei Teshuvah from the Steipler Rav. The Steipler Rav, unbelievable yeda in Orach Chaim, Shulchan Aruch Orach Chaim, hundreds of Marmakaimis and all different things. He was very smart. When it comes out in the 1890s, he asks the Maharsham for his Ha'aris on Shulchan Aruch Orach Chaim. Maharsham gives it to him, and we have a sefer called Darchei Chaim Spinka, and it has in it tons of information from the Steipler Rav, and it also has from the Maharsham Ha'aris on Gans Orach Chaim. Incredible information. What's so incredible about it? Not only is it incredible Bekiyas and Shuvas and Rishonim that mamish unparalleled in that period of time, but it also has tons of original things and original comments, which shows his uniqueness. This sefer becomes a classic. One of the people that goes ahead and writes Ha'aris on the Sefer was the Aderes. The Aderes was fascinated by the Maharsham, very into the Maharsham, so much so that when Kolzman Rabbi Yitzchak Inspector was alive, he was his go-to gadol when he had a very tough shilas. He said this was his rabbi kilu for complicated issues. When Rabbi Yitzchak is nifter, who does he say who's his rabbi? The Galicianer Maharsham, and he sends him his shilas for stuff that he felt that he needed clarity from. Okay, similarly, Reb Chaim Berlin, the Aderes' friend, also when he's talking about great gedolim, he's talking about a certain thing, and he says, "Oh, if you get the Maharsham, then I'll be masking to be mitzaref my name to this and this thing." So I'm showing you already some of the gedolei lita were very into the Maharsham. Furthermore, they say, and I would love to know more if it's how reliable it is. I did not fully check into this, but supposedly the Darchei Teshuvah, he for some reason got a askama from Rabbi Yitzchak Elchanan. So he was told, if you want to get askama from Yitzchak Elchanan, make sure to take out that page that you sent about against relying from the Maharsham, because Rabbi Yitzchak Elchanan is not going to give you askama if he sees that. Okay, they say such a thing, but I have no idea how authentic it is, but okay. Now, then I come across a fascinating piece of information. This is like this. There was some type of shayla in Yerushalayim, different sheikhtim, and they wanted to know what to do. So so Kitzer comes up, the Das Torah of the Tchebiner Rav. They bring it to Rav Kook, and Rav Kook says, you can rely on it. So one of the sheikhtim that was involved with the shayla says, but the Munkatcher Rev, the Darchei Teshuvah, is madgish in his sefer loy lismich on the psakim of the Tchebiner Rav because he's a mekel yoser b'dai. Says Rav Kook. There's two types of goinim. One goin is a goin yotzer, and then there's a goin ma'asif. There's a goin that's a creator; he's able to be a mechadish, and then there's one that's a collector. Who is better? He would say, I hold. This is Rav Kook talking. The one that's a mechadish is bigger. He says like this: the Tchebiner Rav is a goin yotzer, whereas the Munkatcher is rak, a goin masif. I'm sure the Munkatchers don't appreciate this, especially they don't have appreciation for Rav Kook in the first place. But the point is, this is a ma'irdik hagdara in how Gedolei Lita looked at the Tchebiner Rav. As I said, when you look at Darchei Chaim, it's not just that he's bringing down Seforim. Now, it turns out that the Tchebiner Rav, the Maharsham, shows that sometimes the Darchei Teshuvah brings down Seforim and he misquotes it. Now, it's very possible. The reason is very simple, because the Darchei Teshuvah is quoting from a crazy library of information. So, yeah, it could be his matik sometimes, but where the Maharsham was much more a creator, as Rav Kook is saying. Now, interestingly enough, this Gevaldik Hagdara that Rav Kook is saying to be, one nakuda I would like to point out is it's probably he got a chavivus and a respect for the Maharsham, possibly because he knew what the Aderes held, how much his father-in-law, the Aderes, even after he wasn't his father-in-law, he still retained a very close relationship because he married the Aderes' niece. So he had a very close relationship with him. But the point is, more so, that for Rav Kook and for these Gedolei Lita, the point was about the Maharsham is that he was a Ma'irdik Mechadish and he had what to back it up with. Now, so Interestingly enough, as I mentioned, this Gewaldige book that came out just now, Posek Aderes, all about the Maharsham. So they have an excellent chapter over here, all about this topic. And as I said, they even bring they bring this missing document that I never saw, showing where the Tchebiner Rav were put into the new edition in the handwriting, not to rely on it, okay. And they have a lot of very good information. So they bring down this piece of a Kook, but chas v'shalom for such a work to quote it b'shmai, they only bring down it's Reb Rafal HaKohen Kook, but they don't tell you that Reb Rafal HaKohen Kook is saying it over from who? From Yitzchak HaKohen Kook. So it's a typical standard censorship of Rav Kook ad hayoim from certain places of literature. Okay, say that, but the point is, Avram Bramberg, in his book on the Maharsham, which is a very nice book, has this piece. This is what I found many years ago. Okay. Now, there are numerous other quotes to show the chashivas of the Maharsham, which that's not the main point of. We're focusing on Chaim Kanievsky, so we're not going to do that today. Just to mention very briefly is Elyashiv. Turns out, Elyashiv, there was a fascinating, there's a book, Hashakton, which came out in the lifetime of Elyashiv, a whole tumult about the Sefer, very interesting stuff in there. So him and Rosham Zalman once were discussing about a certain Sefer, the Sefer Chaim Bracha, Gewaldige Sefer on Hilchos Daled Minin. So one of them said to the other, Rosham Zalman to Elyashiv, one of them said to the other, it's not only is it Gewaldig, it's because it has Haskama from the Maharsham. So you see these two Gedolim, they looked at the Sefer, it had extra chashivas for them because of the Maharsham. And more than that, they both remarked that our generation doesn't have this type of a unique gadol, superstar gadol, such as the Maharsham. He was something of something that both Rabbi Elyashiv and Rosham Zalman Auerbach were both very into. So much so that in this book they bring down this new book that I'm quoting this whole time, the Sar Torah. So I said they have a whole bunch of fascinating things. And we're not going to, as I said, time is short. We can't quote all different things, but it seems they bring down such Aderes. I would love to see a picture of it, but it says like this. I quoted that the Darchei Teshuvah says in the Hagdama of a Sefer, he publishes a whole thing. Don't rely on the Tchebiner Rav, the Das Torah. Rabbi Elyashiv says on this, Kol Divrei, he writes on the side of his copy, Kol Divrei Maharsham Heim Halacha Ulamaisa. So Rabbi Elyashiv is saying Halacha Maisa. Now, interestingly enough, just to mention two more sentences related to the Maharsham is like this. The Maharsham was crazy prolific, wrote thousands of tshuvas and Seforim and everything. So who was, after his kids published whatever they did, whatever the Maharsham published, who takes it over? The Einikel, the famous person today in Klal Yisrael is famous as known as the Maggid of Yerushalayim. The Maggid speaks thanks to Rabbi Pesach Kron. Reb Shalom Shadron. Reb Shalom Shadron is the Einikel of the Maharsham, and he's the person that works on publishing the ksavim of his Zayda, finding all different things, publishing the manuscripts, whatever they had, and unbelievable the siyata shmai that they had and what they published after the tshuvas, how they kept on finding more tshuvas, and who helps, and he wrote ha'aris on it, who helps the Shalom Shadron. Shalom Shadron is helped by none other than Rabbi Elyashiv. Rabbi Elyashiv also has a lot of ha'aris in the work, in the various volumes of Das Torah. They've published on Archaim, they've published on Gans Yeridea, multiple volumes, and they're finding new stuff. Kaseder. Anyway, for such a yid as Rabbi Elyashiv, Reb Shalom Zalman also was very into it. The brother-in-law of Reb Shalom Shadron, they used to always discuss B'simcha. They remark over here that there were times that there was a certain time he would be Oimid, Reb Shalom Shadron would be Oimid late at night, and understanding a certain marmakim that the Maharsham said, he would go right away to go share with Reb Shalom Zalman. They would dance B'simcha, understanding it. Anyway, the point is that the Gedolei Olam, I'm mentioning the Tchebiner Rav, Reb Shalom Zalman Auerbach, Reb Elyashiv, all very into it. And just in Messiah, this Nakuda is as follows. I come across Rav Herzog. Rav Herzog is talking about a certain Shaila, and he says that it's good enough that we have Rabbeinu Yitzchak Hanan and the Maharsham, and then he says the following sentences about the Maharsham. Bilvad ki kadosh haya Rav Mibarjan umayra muvak ad laflia sheheshev tshuvas la'alafim, and we now know thousands and thousands of tshuvas l'chol tfutzis Yisrael Hashem haya imoy shalacha kemoisai. So basically the point that I'm trying to bring out is like this, that the Maharsham, there was opposition by great Gedolim, Rabbi Yitzchak Shmelkish, Beis Yitzchak, and the Darchei Teshuvah, and others. It seems they had a problem with it. But at the end of the day, as the Tchebiner Rav said, all those papers, they were forgotten about, and we rely on him, as Rabbi Elyashiv says, halacha vila maisa, even though he writes this in his Hagdama of a Sefer. So we see there's a certain thing in Shamayim. Shamayim takes care of which Seforim should become halacha l'maisa? And that's the answer behind the Shach and the Nesivos and Akiva Eiger. All these Seforim, they become the Posek of Klal Yisrael. What was the reason behind it? That is not for me to say, but these are we know from the tremendous character of all these Gedolim. They were superstars, not only in their abilities of learning, and that's what ends up happening. So the point is, you could scream as much as you want, don't rely on me. But everyone knows when you learn Yardei, are you relying on the Shach? Are you relying on the Nesivos? The answer is yes. So Reb Chaim Kanievsky, he could say as much as he wants, but Lamaisa, even in his lifetime, what we see happened is that it becomes relied on, and today, even if for a few short years after he was nifter, it became halacha l'maisa. Now, just to be Messiah, this Nakuda, which we will fine-tune Amir Tzashem in the next further episodes, which we're going to go further into Reb Chaim as a Posek, because we have to explore Reb Chaim's halachic Seforim known as Tshuvas, Reb Chaim Kanievsky, which is a famous, endless amount of literature. I'm definitely not going to discuss all the books that are out there. I have not seen all of them. I'm not going to see all of them, but I'm going to try to talk a little bit about it, put it in context. But there's a following thing like this. Not only does Shemayim decide who becomes our Poskim, as I said, with the Maharsham, as the Tchebiner Rav says, and Rav Elyashiv, and all the other Gedolim that I listed. But there's a Nakuda. When I came across it at the time, it's a fascinating Nakuda, and it's like this. Reb Shlomo Kayin in a Teshuvah to Reb Chaim Berlin says that he once heard from the Netziv, B'Shem Reb Chaim Volozhiner, that one could say a pshat in the Rambam and Shulchan Aruch, even though that the Shulchan Aruch himself didn't mean such a thing. Why? Because there's a Meirdig Kayach in the Shulchan Aruch and the Rambam. They were written Beruch HaKodesh. Once something's written Beruch HaKodesh, so it no longer has they're not in control of what it is. We say it's said and it's emes. Now, just to mention a drop about this Nakuda, and then we'll be Messiah is Azai. There's a lot to say about it, and we will perhaps fine-tune some of this Nakudas later on in the course of the next few episodes of drop. But the point is like this. A Gadol could say, I don't want you to rely on me. The point is, it doesn't make a difference. When there's a special thing, and we find some of these Chiburim, there's claims on some of them at least that they're written Beruch HaKodesh. But it's more than that. It's not even Beruch HaKodesh. Once the Torah is out there, it's no longer the Bailim, so to speak. And the author could say, I didn't mean that. But the Rambam, we know this is a question, which is a fascinating question. People say Torah is in the Rambam. They say, what do you mean? I mentioned the mashal in a different context, but the same story goes like this. They asked the Rambam, they say on different Gedolim, that basically they spent their whole life working on the Rambam. Except they had 1 or 2 Rambams, 3 Rambams, they didn't know the answer. So they come up to Shemayim, they say, before anything, could we go speak to the Rambam? I want to know Pshat. They go to the Rambam tells them Pshat, it's a Shinin, there's a Taisa Tfus here, there's a Shinin Nusach, had a different gear, and the way the story goes, they slap this Adam Gadol, whoever it is, substitute whichever Gadol you want it to be, he slaps in the face. So Rambam, this is not the way you answer a Rambam, it has to be the ganzer shtickle Torah. So it's famous that people say, what do you mean? Is this what the Rambam meant? Is it not what the Rambam meant? So there's an akuda, and that's what's behind this netziv, that once the Rambam says it, there's such a kayach, and the Shulchan Aruch also, it's no longer what the author meant, but what the Torah is out there. And this is a tremendous concept with a lot behind it. The Mabit, at the end, in his last Parak Samach Dalet, has a Meirdik Arichos, which is kedai to learn, to see what's going on with this. And I said we might come back to this. Just to be Messiah, this prat, they say sometimes what happened is like this. The Rambam said halacha. Then turns out he was asked, where's the Makar? And he couldn't find halacha. So the Rambam's Chayzer, he says, okay, I made a mistake. Turns out that they found the Makar. The Vilna Gaon finds a Makar. This Gadol finds a Makar. So what's going on now? We see the halacha is right, but the Rambam was Chayzer. So like this Netziv, which there are others that say such a concept, it doesn't make a difference. You're no longer the Bible. So the point I'm trying to bring out is that these great Gedolei Poskim, they might have intended, it's just for you. It's not for the masses. It's just food for thought, as they say, but it's not. And once they say it, it becomes, it gets a life of its own, as they say. Okay, now, just to mention, if one wants to read a little bit about it, I'm not dealing with all the issues that he brings up, but Mark Shapiro in the Chakira volume 33 and I believe Usher Buchman, they both deal with different aspects of this Nakuda, of these Nakudis, about how once the Torah is said by an Adam Gadol, if it's emes, and how it works all these different things, we might touch on some other aspects about it. But this is the nakuda I'm trying to bring out from that these Gedolei Achronim, they're screaming, don't rely on me halacha l'maisa. No. When Hashem wants it, this farm will become halacha l'maisa, even beyond their control.
Okay. So is this episode halacha l'maisa?
I have no control over it anymore. It's not up to me.
All right. Excellent. Thank you very much. Before we conclude, would you like to share a book review?
Yeah, because we just spoke all about it, so I'm going to mention two things relating to the Maharsham, two Makairis about the Maharsham. One is, it came out relatively recent, and I think it was already it came out a year or two ago and already was reprinted. They say with additions, I don't know if it is, 2 massive volumes. It looks like this, called Posek Aderes. This goes all in depth in every aspect of the Maharsham. It's done beautifully. It has lots of documents, a lot of information, but when you go through this book, you can understand, puts more in context what I was trying to bring out about the galus of the Maharsham, why he was such a superstar gadol in his time, where it deals with all Talmidim, people that had to do with him, his Seforim. He was also famous for being a person who gave a lot of haskamas. They deal with that, all different things. He was involved in many of the controversies, such as the machine matzah controversy. Is an excellent chapter in this book, so I highly recommend these 2 volumes. I believe it's available in most farm stores. That's one relating to the Maharsham, and another book I came across when I was working on the Maharsham at one point in English. I have no idea how I was able to track it down. I remember it was a pain in the neck. It's called the Maharsham of Berjan. It looks like this, from a Baruch Kanievsky. It was put out by also a mishpacha of the Maharsham. It was published in 2001. Has askama from Rav Cohen, and Rav Cohen, just to quote his askama when he talks about it, says that the Tchebiner Rav his name was heard in Adayim. It's heard in all the scholarly halls of study, and then he says, he was a master in all fields of Torah. Through his work, the English-speaking world shall become aware of the Titan who was preeminent as he responded to halachic questions and was known as the Posek Achroin of his generation. Okay, this is Rav Cohen saying it, and there's a lot of very interesting information in this book in English also, but I don't know how available it is. Okay, those are 2 recent books, relatively recent books, relating to the episode that we just spoke about.
Okay, thank you very much. Looking forward to our next episode together.